Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here. Last week I released a video criticizing Final Fantasy XIV's reward structure and things I'd like to see them do going forward. I of course asked all of you to chime in regarding the rewards, and there are tons of ideas that are all worth their own individual videos and addressing. Like I said, that reward video probably won't be the last one, as it's been a major crux of motivating players to get into new content in Final Fantasy XIV. However, some of the comments, both in that video and in my weekly Q&A, brought up a key issue with rewards that I hadn't even considered before going into that initial video, and if you're reading the title, you've probably already figured out what it is. Inventory. It is one of the toughest things to manage in almost any RPG where it isn't just a bottomless pit where I can drop everything because I'm an absolute hoarder. And Final Fantasy XIV has had an inventory problem for a very, very long time, with a lot of band-aids that have gone over it to try to make it feasible. But the worst among us when it comes to hoarding items, especially when there are as many items as there are in Final Fantasy XIV, cannot get enough space. So in this video, I want to talk about Final Fantasy XIV's inventory problem and ways that they can look to solve it in the future. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like an expert on inventory, backend, and MMORPGs, but we do have enough reports from developers, both inside Final Fantasy XIV and elsewhere, that doing this is very, very hard. Initially setting it up is its own thing, but ever expanding upon the base inventory system is apparently quite the challenge. Even WoW has talked about how they didn't increase the base bag space for the longest time. I don't even know if they have up to this point, because it was easier to just add additional bag slots and then increase the size of those instead of actually changing the original one that they designed. It's basically just such a huge foundation for the game that modifying it is one of the scariest things you could possibly do. Everything that goes in and out of your character is going to go through that, and that is a frightening thing. And Final Fantasy XIV is probably no different. We also know that Final Fantasy XIV, according to Yoshi P, saves its back end, saves your character data and all the items twice the average rate. Apparently, most servers do it every 30 seconds, or most games. Again, this statement was made so long ago, I don't even know if this is still true. Whereas Final Fantasy XIV was double that at 15 seconds when the statement was initially made, which kind of puts it into a vicious loop. Like, there's so many items that you want to save it frequently to make sure none are lost, but by doing that, you also make it hard to go back and really expand upon it, and inventory just becomes a tougher system, especially if they ever used code like that for things like retainers, which, given retainers were also in there from the beginning, they probably did something very, very similar, which is why the retainer system is the way that it is, with the how many you can actually rent for free and the paid additionals and blah, blah, blah. There's probably so many factors that go into it that I can't even remotely begin to consider, but, Final Fantasy XIV's inventory, that's kind of the topic of the video, so we kind of have to in some capacity. Now, of course, the base inventory is not everything that you have. There's, of course, the armory chest, which stores a bunch of items for each of your individual gear slots. That's useful on the surface. You're like, oh, I got a couple dozen or more spots for all of my different armor sets. Cool. But when you consider that you may have gear for every single job, or you may have it for secondary content like Eureka or Bosia or something along those lines, plus crafters and gatherers and a lot of job specific gear and the individual weapons and tools for each and every one of those jobs, then suddenly the armory chest just never will feel like it is enough, and then you have to look into your other storage and actually move things in and out. That comes to retainers, which, like I said, you get 2 for free, but then after that you got to pay monthly, probably because of the way the system was built when it was initially made. They have said that there is too much cost that actually occurs because of the way retainers are done, so they can't just infinitely offer them for free. There's the saddlebag, which is nice, but you can also expand it. I just remembered you can expand that by subscribing to the mobile app, which I forgot existed, because what am I going to use that for? What am I going to use the market board on that thing? I don't even remember what it does. I just remember you can, like, once or twice a day for free, like, adjust stuff on the market board or something. Yeah, I ain't doing that for twice the saddlebag space. Then there's the glamour dresser and the armoire, which store a bunch of items, and you can even store as a set now, which I think is something specifically for the glamour dresser. You can condense certain sets into just one space in the dresser, but still be able to use it for all the glams, which is a nice thing. But I mean, listen to all this nomenclature and all these different terms and all these different locations to keep track of everything. Like, yeah, there's the check for items button to search for item. You can iSearch, but It's a lot of items. It's confusing for players. It's hard to manage. And there's so many rules that determine what can go into which. And, you know, then you have to create your own systems for storage. And it's intimidating on top of not really still being enough for the player. It's crazy to think that with all of those options listed, you know, several thousand inventory slots, that can still not be enough. And going back to last week's video and the reason why this came up in my comment section, if they want to add more meaningful rewards that help empower the player that actually result in something like armor or accessories, then inventory becomes one of the limiting factors. And quite frankly, it's probably a reason why rewards tend to lean towards things like mounts, minions, things that are consumable. You know, you get a barding or a mount or a new frame for your adventure plate or a fashion accessory, a new hairstyle, a new emote. All of these things are consumables. So they kind of skirt around the problem of inventory, and they can add a little bit, you know, like Pilgrim's Traverse has the weapons that you can earn. But, you know, we already talked about the armory chest and how tough that can be. So that just kind of ends up factoring into the whole thing as well. So again, it just keeps adding and adding and adding. And because there's, you know, not a bottomless pit, some of us have more problems than others. I'm sure some of us could definitely do with cleaning out what we have. You know, we don't need to hang on to every single thing. We don't need to be prepared for every single scenario. I don't want to imagine what some of your houses look like if I can see what, well, I mean your real houses, obviously not your in-game houses because you probably don't have one. But, you know, I can't imagine, because if you have that same attitude, it's just, it's transferable, and it's honestly quite frightening. But it is a real problem. If they want more meaningful rewards, there's a good chance those more meaningful rewards will take up inventory. And unless inventory is addressed through one of many various band-aid methods, then it will just make this entire thing way, way harder to do. So again, it's just harder to talk about rewards if we don't talk about this as well. So with that, what can they do to help with inventory space in Final Fantasy XIV? It's actually been a long discussion. This is not something that just popped up recently, because there's just a lot of things that they do that seemingly take up inventory space for the sake of taking up inventory space, when there are probably other solutions or things they could eventually do, assuming they have the ability to do something like it on the back end, that just makes things better for the player. So let's look at some of the items that might be taking up inventory space in you, or of course my inventory, and see if we can come up with a quick solution for some of them. Let's start with something really basic: crafting materials. People have been long asking for something like a tackle box for fishing bait, as well as a crafting inventory where only your crafting materials go into it. Now, of course, I'm not asking for an infinite crafting material book, although there is a way to do that, as seen in Guild Wars 2. And actually, even that's not infinite. You have to actually pay for upgrades. So even that has its limit, but it's pretty expansive for what it is. So I'm not going to harp on it really at all. It's still a really good system for specifically storing crafting materials. And that's kind of it. We have good examples of how to manage this. Separate inventories and separate ways to just kind of store them in logs that don't really take up as much inventory as they are more of just like, I feel like Guild Wars 2's system is something where you kind of delete the, okay, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of this throughout the video. I'm going to be kind of guessing how things are designed to skirt around the issue of inventory. Obviously, they don't create infinite inventory, but they allow for more data to actually be stored and transferred for each and every player. So with Guild Wars 2, for their crafting material book, looking at it, it doesn't actually appear to store your items. It's really more like a list of currencies that you have in crafting material form. So what I'd assume actually happens is when you place the item in it, it actually probably eliminates the item and credits your account with that amount of material. So instead of having to store it as item code, it stores it almost as just like a much lower amount of data condensed into just kind of like a credit that you have with everything. And looking on the back end, that's probably the way to go about it in Final Fantasy XIV as well. I think any band-aid system where we can take an item code and remove it to store it someplace else is probably the key to expanding inventory. Now, that again is not so simple. It really depends on the actual core item code for the game. And even then, it doesn't create infinite storage. So you need to understand how to make that storage satisfactory to the player. And then, like I said, even Guild Wars 2, you can go about expanding those systems as well, so you can store more and more and more So does it become another monetized feature if Final Fantasy XIV does something like that? There's a high probability that it actually would. But it would at least, even at its base form, if they could manage to find a way to make a crafting log or a more like a crafting storage specifically, that it would do a lot to alleviate problems, because crafting materials for some of us take up an absolutely obscene amount of space. Now, there's also, this is probably the biggest one and has actually been a topic as of late, currencies. Final Fantasy XIV is in a weird place when it comes to currencies, because they simultaneously have a currency tab that stores certain currencies, Allied Society tokens, your tomestones, your scripts. But they also release a ton of actual inventory-based currencies for any number of reasons. Now, some of them kind of make sense. You can sell some of them on the market board, so their inherent value, it kind of requires them to be an item, just by virtue of the way the game is designed. Obviously, if it was designed where you could exchange currencies on the market board and then have sellable currencies, that changes things entirely. Do I think they could go back and completely rewrite that? No, again, we're probably looking for band-aid solutions. So what is a band-aid solution for a currency? Well, number one, we need to understand how they can actually store currencies in a menu. Do they need to make a new menu? How does it actually affect their code? But creating a new currency tab that actually keeps track of these things like your offerings for Pilgrim's Traverse or your books from your weekly clears, which realistically don't need to be items at all because they're untradeable. And they need to look at those and determine, okay, how can we store these items as less code, and is it efficient to do with our item code in the first place? And then, if they really want to take the extra step, and this is probably much harder to do, similar to the crafting log, the idea of putting an item into a log or, a book of some kind or whatever where it's stored, and erasing the item code to give you credit for it. If they want to sell it, then the ability to pull the item back out just technically needs to be registered on the server to create item code from the credit that you actually have. So I think that core system is going to actually come back a lot, because I do think that's how most games try to get around the currency system. And Final Fantasy XIV has only done it piecemeal and hasn't been consistent with doing it more and more with more of their currency-based systems. Heck, with gear, I'd imagine transmogrification systems work very well. Guild Wars 2 and World of Warcraft both have systems where once you obtain a piece of gear, its appearance is effectively unlocked. So how I'd imagine that's done, that's clearly not saved. You're not storing an item and it's being converted into something else. What it sounds like they probably did is they had their item code, added a flag to it so that upon obtaining it, it would flag it in the book. And then I'd assume the book, again, doesn't rewrite the item code over your character. It's more like a skin over whatever you actually have. And as such, that makes it possible for us to just, if we obtain an item and we only want it for its appearance, to destroy the item code altogether, as long as we don't plan on ever actually using it for any functional need in the game. And if we do, then we'd have to obtain it again. But that's probably their solution that they need to be looking towards with gear. Because I actually think that as much as crafting materials and currencies do take up inventory space, a lot of you just have too much gear. And I say too much because you probably really don't need it all. Like, I'm sure this is true of all the topics, but you're like, yeah, but what if I want to do this look one day? And it's like, ugh. Or, some of you maybe just spent a lot of gil. Some of you maybe bought items off the Mog Station, which is funny because technically Mog Station releases would benefit from this too. I'm sure there are people who don't want to buy things off the Mog Station because of their inventory concerns. There are some people who also don't know you can drop items and then repurchase them from the Calamity Salvager in any of the major cities, and so the education on that system is also kind of lacking. So there's just all sorts of things. I mean, one of my personal gripes is unstorable relics. I have every relic in the game, and there is technically a solution to my problem, but it's one I don't really like very much. Effectively, my best solution is to destroy every original relic, buy the replica relics, and then store those away in the glam dresser. So I'm basically just moving inventory at that point. But the fact that relics have code built into them, the random stats built into them, that they subsequently don't allow to be stored is a separate item problem altogether, because it means if they ever want to do random stats given to the player, not that they should, but if they ever wanted to, their game systems are already not built to actually store that data in a few of their actual, like you'd have to go saddlebag, retainer, inventory. You can't stick it in the glamp dresser. You can't stick it in the armoire. And I don't know that they would add a system that specifically does that or even address it with how infrequently it's ever used. They'd have to really be motivated to fix that. And I think that's the main reason why they even released the replicas in the first place, because they want you to have a solution to this problem when the stats are no longer the relevant reason as to why you would actually hang on to any of these individual relics. But all of these things combined just lead to an issue where a player can actually see a cool reward that they want. And instead of being fully excited for it, they look in their inventory and go, oh, boy. So I think that fixing the reward problem has to kind of simultaneously be looked at with the inventory problem, because you need to create both a safe environment for people to be motivated as well as the motivation to actually do said thing. Now, I'm sure there are tons of individual inventory problems and probably inventory solutions that I didn't even bring up in this video. I do have a little bit of an overcrowded inventory, largely because of the relics and largely because of currencies more than anything else. But I don't usually feel too much pressure for anything other than my armory chests. Like, getting rid of old gear is probably my biggest thing that I forget to do. Yes, I could just desynthesize it and then sell or drop whatever the actual result is, but I just forget, right? Like, that's on me. I'm not going to blame them for me looking at it and going like, man, I should really do that instead of being lazy, instead of hoping that they just expand it infinitely. But I'm sure that all of you have all sorts of inventory issues, concerns, and potentially solutions that would be beneficial to the team. They are in a mode where they are listening to feedback now more than ever. So that is why I'm doing these video ideas. And that's why I want you in the comment section to talk about it. Obviously, I don't expect the devs to come to my comment section and look for these results, but if you feel comfortable talking about it in one place, you may be comfortable bringing it to another location. And should I ever get the opportunity to ask questions or interview Yoshi P at any point, I, of course, can bring some of the larger concerns to Yoshi P and get some more clarification and information about these types of topics. Or maybe other creators will too, if they're given the same opportunity. You know, they do interviews with, magazines, they do interviews with websites, they do interviews with creators, they do all sorts of stuff. So there's always the possibility that someone may hear of this issue and do it. So we need to talk about it in, an environment that actually gets it out there in some capacity or brings all of those opinions together into one place. So with that, I think I've mentioned enough about inventory in Final Fantasy XIV. What do you think about some of the solutions and some of the problems that inventory has created? Do you think it's actually a hurdle for the reward structure of Final Fantasy XIV, or do you think we're just dancing around what the real problem actually is? Let me know in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned, because we'll be doing more of these criticism style videos in order to get the best 8.0 that we possibly can and beyond that for Final Fantasy XIV. With that, I will see all of you in the next one. And until then, take care.